Pathfinder Wrath of the Warhammer Land Rogue Calm is another ambitious entry in the CRPG genre from Owlcat Games, which by now we've learned will always guarantee 3 things. 1. There will be a heavy focus on roleplaying. 2. You will spend more time reading than actually playing the game. And 3. The game will be completely broken at both release and at the end of its life cycle. Yeah, let me cut to the chase. This is some of the most fun I've had with a CRPG in a long time, but deep down I know that this is not a good game, if that makes sense. Here's why. Warhammer 40k Rogue Trader has you step inside the shoes of the heir of Theodora von Valancius, a, who would have figured, rogue trader, responsible for acting as an explorer, conquistador and interstellar merchant for the Imperium of Man. At this point I've already mentioned like 7 different lore aspects, which will mean absolutely nothing to you if you are not familiar with the Warhammer universe, but don't worry, because neither am I, and I still managed to thoroughly enjoy the game. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said about the story. When I reached the 100-hour mark of this game, and on top of that, the end of Act 4, I came to a sudden realization. I had absolutely no clue what in the fuck this game's story was actually about. You see, the game has a plot twist, or more so a plot setup, as Theodora gets assassinated, and you are automatically turned into the new rogue trader of House von Valancius. This is barely a spoiler, as this happens in like the first 30 minutes of the game. You then spend all of the remaining chapters discovering that there are aliens and unruly subjects who want to kill you or take over your dynasty because they don't like you, or they don't like your predecessor, or one of the people in your command, or because they simply don't like humanity. At one point there's a sort of indie version of HAL 9000, which is trying to learn from you what being human is like. A cult suddenly appears. Basically everybody wants you either dead or gone, but there's never a cohesive aha moment in which all of this actually falls into place properly. In short, the game basically sets up like 20 different plot points, but it never fleshes any of them out. It tries to keep you engaged by breaking up the pace in Act 3, and without spoiling too much, things turn awry and you have to spend the start of the chapter getting back on your feet, finding your companions and your gear, etc. Just before this point, you actually properly just got a hang of the game and finally got your build going, so for them to cut your progress short by introducing this little cliffhanger was a welcoming change to me, but I could also see how most people at this point have just lost all interest in the game and simply give up on it. CRPGs often suffer from incredibly complex fighting systems, or on the contrary have way too simplistic fighting systems that are fun at first but then turn into just being mind-numbingly boring after a handful of tries. Rogue Trader found a pretty well balanced sweet spot in this aspect. In my first playthrough, I didn't look up any guides or what was the best build to use. I just made a guy who had psychic abilities, wielded a sword in one hand and a gun in the other, and dashed from one enemy to the next, building up momentum. And that worked great, as I kept improving his abilities and skills throughout the entire run without getting bored. In the second one, I played as a crime lord who acted as an officer in combat, constantly buffing allies and debuffing enemies whilst running around herself with 2 weapon sets, and this also worked really well. You can play as a typical tank, a sniper, a full-on psyker, which are basically mages in this universe, either delivering support or dealing massive amounts of damage. It's not the most in-depth and detailed fighting system you're ever gonna see, but it does flow really well and it's easy to understand, which to me is a lot more important. It wouldn't be a CRPG without insanely unfair boss fights and unbalanced difficulty spikes, so I'm happy to announce this particular issue is present in this game as well. You can be slaughtering enemy groups left, right and center for hours on end, only to get surprised by a fucking armored gorilla literally waltzing through a wall that one-shots your entire party within a blink of an eye. Apparently in the 40k universe, ships are really important. Something I only figured out after making the mistake of taking an interest in them. After a quick Google search and realizing that there are like a billion of them, I left my profoundly new interest for these things on the back burner and just stuck to what the game calls ship combat. It wouldn't be an Owlcat game without some mismanaged and barely functioning type of combat that you're forced to do next to your normal combat, but at least this time it's decently fun. You won't be met with huge difficulty spikes here, and except for the first 3 levels in which my ship just absolutely sucked ass, I could cruise through the rest of the ship fights in the game with relative ease on daring difficulty.
I'm glad we all made it through that dark hour.
There are a crap ton of different role-playing options to pick from in every conversation. Besides general options, you can on occasion also pick dogmatic, iconoclast, and heretical options that will branch out different little side quests, outcomes, and revelations for your character. I've had the most fun by just picking things that I found fitting for the character I was roleplaying as. But by doing so, I ran into the issue in the late game that I didn't commit enough to one path, so to speak, which ruled out plenty of outcomes and options, which just sucked. As the game constantly tries to shove every dialogue option into one of these 3 boxes, you're almost being forced to roleplay a certain way. I know they're limited with the source material and their budget, and they had to make do with what they had, but it's still not really preferable to me in a role-playing game, especially a CRPG.
Child of Azurian, doomed to spend an eternity alone amid the dust of Monkey.
I really like what they did with the companions in this game. I fucking hate it when RPGs introduce companions that, for example, have a very strong and specific outlook on life or have a very precise role to fulfill, but then your character comes along, hits like 4 different speech checks, and suddenly this companion that has had these views for like 40 years straight does a complete 180 and is now suddenly completely on your side. Rogue Trader does an amazing job at portraying characters that, sure, have their own ideas and ideologies, but by conversing with them enough and doing their companion quests, you can turn them into being more merciful or more pragmatic, or constantly engage with them and discuss the alternative views you have on the world compared to them and their race and how these differences came to be, etc. It's good shit.
At your beck and reduced to dust.
Now, after all of that, you might say, that doesn't sound too bad. It has its issues, but at least everything functions properly, right? Yeah, it's
funny.
Here's a list of all of the broken or badly functioning game mechanics I ran into with this game. The user interface, inventory management, and just overall cargo and trading system of the game are some of the most confusing and overall terrible I've ever experienced in my 20 years of playing video games. For a game which is quite literally called Rogue Trader, you think that trading would be more elaborate or at least play a bigger role in the game. But the gist of it basically boils down to: walk up to a trader, realize they have certain wishes and requirements, realize that there's no auto-sorting function that places your loot into any type of these required categories, start dragging random shit to your cargo hold and hope that one of the things you just dragged over is what they desire. The same goes for the leveling up system. On certain levels you can't even pick abilities, but you just get some passive abilities or basically information, but instead of automatically receiving these, I still have to open up the character menu, plus every companion that is also leveling up, and then select all of these things individually. By the midway point of the game, this is what your inventory will roughly look like. Now let's say you want to compare gear or weapons for your character to see what would fit them better at that time. Yeah. You can't. You can sort your inventory by the following features, but there's no way to actually properly get a look at what's better than the other, except for just dragging something over to your character and then hovering over the other weapon or type of gear you might want to use, and then do that individually for every weapon. The camera on multiple occasions experiences an epileptical. The camera spazzes out a lot. Companions I dismissed or told to permanently leave my party suddenly showed up again in later chapters, but as the game already recognized them as gone, they were still part of every dialogue scene, but their body was, I don't know, hovering somewhere in between space and real time, I guess. Enemies T-pose constantly after certain fighting animations. Sometimes enemies were shooting me from platforms I could only reach with portals or with long-range weapons, but as the portals disappeared, I had no way to reach them, so I had to reload save files, and honestly, the list kinda goes on.
Your end was inevitable.
So, with all of that being said, do I recommend you to play this game? You would think not, but I actually do, yeah. Like, look man, I know nothing about Warhammer 40k, but the lore and universe of this game do really intrigue me. And Owlcat did a really good job at portraying this universe in such a way that for diehard 40k fans, it's a nice experience. It's some new Warhammer shit to experience, but for a complete noob and an idiot like me, it was also pretty cool to just experience this stuff for the first time and a nice introduction into the rest of the 40k universe. And on top of that, it goes on sale like 5 times a month on Steam, and a sequel is in the making. And from what I figured out 10 minutes ago, the sequel is gonna be hallelujah, completely voice acted. So no more reading Bible text every 5 minutes. In any case, let me know what you think of the game, and yeah, I'm gonna see you on the next one. Peace.